Robert Chen's Tesla pulled into the circular driveway of his Bel Air mansion at 11:47 p.m. Far later than usual. The October wind rustled through the manicured hedges as he loosened his tie. Exhausted from back-to-back meetings about his latest real estate development project, the security lights cast long shadows across the limestone facade, and something felt different tonight. Wrong. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. He noticed it immediately. A large wicker basket placed precisely in the center of his front steps. Robert's first instinct was to call security, but something made him pause. Maybe it was fatigue clouding his judgment, or maybe it was the strange pull he felt toward the basket, like a magnet drawing him forward. As he approached, soft whimpering sounds emerged from within. Robert's heart rate quickened. He crouched down, his expensive suit pants scraping against the concrete, and pulled back the cream-colored blanket. Two pairs of dark eyes stared back at him, a boy and a girl, no more than 3 years old, with identical heart-shaped faces and black hair. Tucked between them was a plain white envelope. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, finding a single sentence written in precise handwriting. "They belong with you." No signature, no explanation, just 5 words that would change everything. "Sir," his security guard, Martinez, called from the gatehouse. "Is everything all right?" Robert's mind raced. He should call the police. Child services. Anyone. This was absurd. He couldn't just take in 2 abandoned children. He was Robert Chen, CEO of Chen Real Estate Development, not some character in a Dickens novel. But as he looked at their faces again, something deep within him shifted. The girl, she had his mother's eyes. And the boy. Robert felt a jolt of recognition so profound it made him dizzy. "Everything's fine, Martinez." "Family matter." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Family matter? Where had that come from? He brought the basket inside, placing it carefully on the marble kitchen counter. The twins watched him silently, their eyes following his every move. They seemed unusually calm for abandoned children, as if they'd been expecting him. "I'm Robert," he said softly, then immediately felt foolish for introducing himself to toddlers. The girl smiled, a knowing smile that seemed too mature for her age. The boy reached out and touched Robert's hand, and a shock of familiarity coursed through him. Julia would be home tomorrow from her business trip. He had until then to figure this out. As he watched the twins explore their new surroundings with curious eyes, memories he'd long suppressed began surfacing. Memories of another pair of dark eyes, identical to his own, glimpsed only once in an old photograph his mother had tried to hide. Daniel, his twin brother, who supposedly died at birth, the brother his parents never discussed, whose existence was reduced to whispered conversations that stopped when Robert entered the room. He'd always felt something was missing, like an phantom limb that still ached decades after amputation. Robert set up the guest room with 2 small beds, grateful now for Julia's insistence on keeping children's furniture for when their nieces visited. As he tucked the twins in, the girl, he'd started thinking of her as Mia, in his head, reached up and touched his cheek. The gesture was so tender, so familiar, it made his chest ache. "You look sad," she said, her first words since arriving, like the man in the shadows. Robert froze. What man? But she had already closed her eyes, her brother Leo following suit as if on cue. Robert stood in the doorway, watching their peaceful faces, identical in sleep. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to call the authorities. But a deeper instinct, one he didn't yet understand, told him these children were exactly where they needed to be. As he headed to his own bedroom, Robert caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, he thought he saw someone standing behind him, a figure with his face but hollow eyes. When he turned, there was only darkness. Sleep eluded him that night. Robert lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of children breathing in his usually silent house, while memories of his childhood played like a broken record. The whispered arguments between his parents, the locked room in the East Wing that no one ever entered, the way his mother would sometimes call him by the wrong name, then cry without explanation. Tomorrow, he would have to make decisions. Tomorrow, he would have to face Julia's questions and deal with the legal implications of harboring abandoned children. But tonight, as the October wind howled outside and the shadows seemed to dance on his walls, Robert Chen felt more complete than he had in 43 years. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of everything unraveling. The first signs that something was wrong appeared within hours of the twins' arrival. Robert woke at 3 a.m. to find every faucet in the house running at full blast. The sound of rushing water filled the 12,000 square foot mansion, creating a white noise that made his skin crawl. He checked the twins' room first. They slept peacefully, undisturbed by the water's roar. Must be a pressure issue, he muttered, systematically turning off each tap. But when he reached the master bathroom, he stopped cold. Written in the steam on the mirror were 2 words: find him. The letters dripped downward, disappearing before his eyes. Robert blinked hard, and when he looked again, the mirror showed only his own tired face. Morning brought no relief. The housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, quit without explanation after 20 years of service. There's something not right about those children, Mr. Chen, she said, hands shaking as she packed her things. The way they stare, the way they know things. No things, Robert pressed, but she just crossed herself and hurried out the door. He found out what she meant at breakfast. Leo, the boy, looked up from his untouched cereal and said, "The lady in the red dress is going to fall today." Robert dismissed it until he turned on the news 3 hours later. A woman in a red dress had fallen from the observation deck of his newest downtown development. She survived, but the incident forced a construction delay that cost his company millions. Objects began disappearing: Julia's favorite earrings, Robert's collection of vintage watches, family photos from the walls. They would reappear days later in impossible places, inside locked safes, buried in the garden, floating in the pool. Robert started keeping a log, trying to find patterns in the chaos, but it only highlighted how quickly his ordered world was unraveling. The twins themselves seemed oblivious to the strange occurrences. During the day, they played like normal children, though they rarely spoke to anyone but each other. They drew constantly, endless crayon sketches of shadowy figures and twisted trees. Leo's drawings particularly disturbed Robert. They always featured the same dark figure, tall and thin, watching from corners or windows. "Who is that?" Robert asked one afternoon, pointing to the figure in Leo's latest drawing. "He looks like you," Leo replied without looking up, "but his eyes are empty because the shadow ate them." Julia returned from her business trip to find her husband sleeping in his office, surrounded by security camera footage he'd been reviewing obsessively. The cameras caught nothing unusual, except for occasional static interference at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night. "You look terrible," she said, taking in his disheveled appearance. "What's going on, and why are there children's toys everywhere?" Robert tried to explain about the twins, about his inexplicable need to keep them, about the strange events, but saying it out loud made him sound crazy. Julia listened with growing concern, her face shifting from confusion to worry to fear. "They need to go to proper authorities," she insisted. "This isn't normal, Robert. None of this is normal." That night, Julia woke to find both twins standing at the foot of their bed, holding hands and staring, just staring. When she screamed, they didn't flinch. Robert rushed in from his office, but by then, the twins were back in their beds, seemingly asleep. "I can't stay here," Julia said, packing a bag at dawn. "Not until those children are gone. There's something wrong with them, Robert. Something wrong with this whole situation." She left for her sister's house, promising to return once he'd come to his senses. Alone with the twins, Robert threw himself into work, taking video calls from his home office. while the children played quietly in the corner. But focus became impossible. His laptop would freeze on images of his brother's old photographs. Files would corrupt, replacing business documents with pages of binary code that, when translated, spelled out the same message over and over. "Remember, Daniel." The breaking point came when Leo appeared in his office doorway late one night, pale as chalk. "The shadow man is crying," he said. "He misses you." Robert followed the boy's pointing finger to the window. For a split second, he saw it, a figure that could have been his reflection, but wasn't. It raised a hand to the glass, leaving a frost pattern that spelled out a date. July 7th, 1980, the day his parents told him his twin brother had died. The rational part of Robert's mind searched for explanations. Stress, lack of sleep, guilt over never questioning his brother's death. But as he sat in his dark office, listening to the twins whisper to each other in a language that wasn't quite English, he knew he was past the point of rational explanations. These children had brought something into his house, or maybe they had awakened something that was already there, sleeping in the shadows of his memory. Either way, Robert Chen, pragmatic businessman, self-made millionaire, pillar of the Los Angeles real estate community, was being forced to confront the possibility that reality was not what he had always believed it to be. And somewhere in the darkness, watching and waiting, the shadow of his brother grew stronger. The old key felt heavy in Robert's hand. He'd found it in his father's study after his parents' death 5 years ago, but had never used it. Now, standing before the locked door of the mansion's attic, he knew it was time. The twins' arrival had awakened something, and answers lurked in the dusty corners of his family's past. The lock turned with a resistance that suggested decades of disuse. The attic air was thick with dust and the musty smell of forgotten things. Robert's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating stacks of boxes labeled in his mother's precise handwriting. Family records, photos, pre-1980, Daniel's things. His hand trembled as he opened the last box. Inside, wrapped in acid-free paper, lay baby clothes, 2 identical sets. One was worn and washed countless times, the other pristine, never used. Beneath them, he found a leather-bound album he'd never seen before. The first photos were typical enough. His parents, young and smiling, preparing for their first child. Then came the hospital photos. Robert's breath caught. There he was, newborn and crying, and beside him, equally real, equally alive, was another baby. Daniel, the brother he'd been told, died at birth. "You were separated," came a small voice behind him. Robert spun around to find Mia standing in the doorway, her dark eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. "The shadow man shows me in dreams." "Daniel died," Robert said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. He turned back to the album, flipping pages faster now. Photos of 2 babies coming home from the hospital, 2 cribs in the nursery. Then, abruptly, only 1 baby, only 1 crib, only Robert. A yellowed envelope fell from between the pages. Inside was a letter dated July 8th, 1980, the day after Daniel's supposed death. It was written in his father's sharp, angular script. "The decision has been made. One must be given up to save the other. The curse demands separation. Robert will remain with us. Daniel goes to them. This is the price of breaking the cycle. God forgive us." Robert's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the letter. Them, who are they? But Mia had vanished as silently as she'd appeared. Deeper in the box, he found more evidence of his brother's existence. A birth certificate, early medical records, and most disturbing of all, a silver pendant on a broken chain. Robert recognized it immediately. His mother had worn an identical one until her death. She'd told him it was unique, a family heirloom. But here was its twin, marked with the same intricate Chen family crest. When he picked up the pendant, the temperature in the attic plummeted. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the flashlight flickered. In its strobing light, he saw a figure standing in the corner. Tall, thin, with his face but hollow eyes. It reached out toward him, mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came. Robert stumbled backward, dropping the pendant. It hit the floor with a metallic ring that seemed to echo forever. When the flashlight steadied, he was alone again, but on an old mirror propped against the wall, frost had formed in a pattern that looked like two identical boys holding hands. He fled the attic, slamming the door behind him. In the hallway, he nearly collided with Julia, who had returned unexpectedly from her sister's house. "We need to talk," she said, her face grave. "I've been doing research about twins in your family's history, about what happened to them." She spread newspaper clippings on the kitchen table, stories spanning decades. Twins born to the Chen family in every generation, followed by mysterious accidents, disappearances, deaths. Always one twin vanishing, the other living on alone. A pattern repeating itself, like a curse. "Your brother didn't die, Robert," Julia said softly. "He was taken to break the cycle, but I don't think it worked." "The twins," Robert whispered, realization dawning. "They're connected to this somehow." To Daniel, from upstairs came the sound of children laughing, but when Robert checked, the twins were sound asleep. On their shared nightstand sat two silver pendants, identical to the one he'd found in the attic. As he watched, they began to spin slowly, defying gravity, casting dancing shadows on the wall. That night, Robert dreamed of two boys playing in a garden. One was himself, at age 3. The other was Daniel. In the dream, they wore matching pendants. As they played, shadows gathered around them, growing darker and more substantial until they began taking shape. The same figure he'd seen in the attic. He woke with a certainty that chilled him to his core. The twins weren't just random children left on his doorstep. They were a message, a key, a way to unlock something his parents had tried desperately to keep buried. And somewhere out there, his brother was trying to reach him through the veil between their worlds. The next morning, Robert found his phone filled with missed calls from the office. His latest development project, a high-rise built on old Chen family property, had suffered a catastrophic foundation collapse overnight. As he watched the news footage, he noticed something in the background. Two small children holding hands, watching the destruction. The camera panned back, and they were gone. The curse wasn't broken, it was evolving, and the twins were only the beginning. Julia Chen had never believed in curses until she found the manuscript. After a week of digging through historical archives and consulting with experts in Chinese folklore, she discovered a leather-bound journal from 1892, written by Robert's great-grandfather, Chen Weiming. The pages were brittle, filled with frantic scribblings in both Chinese and English. "I've traced it back to the beginning," Julia read aloud in Robert's study, while the twins played silently in the corner. "The curse began with my father's betrayal of his own twin. In pursuit of power, he sacrificed his brother to dark forces, believing it would bring our family prosperity. He was right. Our fortune grew, but at a terrible price." Robert sat rigid in his chair, the pendant from the attic heavy in his pocket. "What price?" "The curse manifests through twins," Julia continued reading. "In each generation, the Chen family bears them. One must be sacrificed so the other may prosper. If both survive past their 3rd year, tragedy follows, not just for the family, but for all connected to them." As if responding to her words, the lights in the study flickered. Leo looked up from his drawing, his eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. "The shadow is hungry," he said matter-of-factly. "It always needs more." Julia pulled out newspaper clippings she'd gathered. 1923, Chen twins separated at birth, one sent to an orphanage. The orphanage burned down a month later. 1951, Chen twins. One disappeared during a family vacation. The surviving twin became a successful businessman. 1980, Robert and Daniel, separated by their parents' desperate choice. "Your parents knew," Julia said softly. "They tried to break the cycle by giving Daniel away in secret, making you believe he died. They thought distance would weaken the curse. But it didn't work," Robert finished. "The shadow, It's been waiting, growing stronger. Julia spread more documents across the desk. Property records, death certificates, old maps. A pattern emerged. Every major Chen family success was preceded by tragedy. Every building in their real estate empire was built on ground where mysterious accidents had occurred. The curse feeds on separation, Julia explained. It draws power from the twins' broken bond. Your father used that power, knowingly or not, to build his fortune. And you? I've been doing the same thing, Robert whispered, thinking of his successful developments, each one marked by inexplicable accidents and delays. The shadow, it's been following me all along. Mia approached the desk, her small hand reaching for one of the documents. The paper burst into flame at her touch, burning fast and hot before turning to ash. In the silence that followed, they could hear whispers in the walls, growing louder. Julia's research had uncovered more than just history. She'd found references to an ancient ritual, one that could potentially break the curse. But the price was high. It required reuniting what was broken, bringing together what was forcibly separated. We need to find Daniel, Julia said. He's the key to ending this. But Robert, there's something else. Something worse. She pulled out her final piece of evidence. A series of photographs spanning decades. Each showed Chen family twins at different ages. In every photo, a dark figure lurked in the background, becoming more distinct with each generation. In the most recent photos, it was clearly visible, a shadowy form with hollow eyes. It's growing stronger, Julia said. The curse isn't just splitting twins apart anymore. It's trying to manifest physically through them. She nodded toward Mia and Leo, who had begun humming an eerie melody in perfect unison. The temperature in the study dropped suddenly. Books flew off shelves, pages ruffling with invisible wind. The twins stood perfectly still, their shadows stretching impossibly long across the floor, merging with the darkness in the corners. We don't have much time, Julia said urgently. The curse, it's not just about your brother anymore. These children, I don't think they're really children at all. There's something the curse created, using your connection with Daniel as a blueprint. Robert reached for the twins, but his hands passed through them like smoke. For a moment, their faces flickered, revealing something ancient and hungry beneath their innocent expressions. Every time the Chen family separated twins, it grew stronger, Julia continued, her voice shaking. Each broken bond fed it. Now it's powerful enough to create its own twins, to use them as anchors in our world. And if we don't find Daniel soon, she didn't need to finish. They both watched as Mia and Leo turned to face them, their eyes now completely black, their shadows twisting into impossible shapes on the wall. The curse wasn't just revealing itself, it was making its final move. And somewhere in the darkness, Daniel was waiting. Perhaps the only person who could help them stop what their family had set in motion generations ago. Thunder cracked outside, though the sky was clear. In the study's window, Robert caught a glimpse of his reflection, but the face looking back wasn't his. It wore Daniel's features, aged to match his own, mouth moving in silent words of warning. The game had changed. They weren't just fighting a family curse anymore. They were racing against time to prevent something ancient and evil from fully entering their world, using the broken bonds of Chen family twins as its gateway. And the twins were only the beginning. The first prediction came during breakfast. Mia lowered her spoon and spoke in a voice that wasn't quite her own. The glass tower will fall today. 3 hours later, Robert watched in horror as the glass facade of his downtown project shattered inexplicably, raining shards onto empty streets. By some miracle, a fire alarm had evacuated the building minutes before. The twins' powers were growing stronger daily. Leo could now locate any object in the mansion just by thinking about it, while Mia seemed to know everyone's secrets. They moved in perfect synchronization, finished each other's sentences, and sometimes spoke in languages that Robert recognized as ancient Chinese dialects, languages they couldn't possibly know. They're changing, Julia observed from the doorway of the playroom. watching the twins stack blocks into impossible structures that defied gravity. They're becoming more connected to whatever's behind all this. Robert nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the silver pendant he now wore constantly. The twins had their own matching pendants now. They'd simply appeared around their necks one morning. When all three pendants were close together, they hummed with an energy that made the air feel thick with electricity. The accidents at Robert's properties escalated. Each incident was preceded by the twins drawing detailed pictures of the destruction. Their crayon artwork covered the walls now, scenes of collapse, fire, and shadow figures that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of one's eye. One night, Robert found them standing in his office, holding hands and staring at his computer screen. Lines of code flashed by at impossible speeds, and when it stopped, every file had been replaced with old photographs, hundreds of images of Chen family twins throughout history. In each photo, the shadow figure became more distinct, closer to the subjects, its hollow eyes more defined. "He's almost ready," Leo said, not turning around. "The shadow man just needs one more thing." "What does he need?" Robert asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "The other half," Mia replied, finally facing him. Her eyes reflected something ancient and hungry. "The missing piece. Daniel." That night, Robert dreamed he was 3 years old again, playing in his childhood home. Daniel was there, not as a baby, but as his adult self, an exact mirror of Robert, except for his hollow, shadow-filled eyes. "They're not really children," Dream Daniel said, watching the twins play in the distance. "They're fragments of us, pieces of our broken bond, given form by the curse. The stronger they get, the closer the shadow comes to making itself real." Robert woke to find his bedroom filled with a soft blue light emanating from his pendant. Down the hall, he heard the twins singing an old Chinese lullaby, the same one his mother used to sing, though he'd never taught it to them. The next day brought the most dramatic demonstration of the twins' abilities yet. During a video conference with his board of directors, they appeared behind him, visible to everyone on the call. As the board members watched in horror, the twins began speaking in unison, revealing company secrets, hidden affairs, and buried crimes. The stock price plummeted within hours, but it was their physical manifestations that truly terrified Robert. They could now appear in multiple places simultaneously. Security cameras caught them walking through walls. Objects moved in their presence, and electronics malfunctioned. The mansion itself seemed to bend around them, corridors stretching impossibly long when they walked them. Julia documented everything obsessively, filling notebooks with observations and theories. "They're like anchors," she explained one evening, after watching the twins materialize through a solid wall. "The curse is using them to pull something through, or someone." The breakthrough came during a severe thunderstorm. Lightning struck the mansion repeatedly, drawn to the twins as they stood in the garden, their pendants glowing bright blue. Robert rushed outside to bring them in, but stopped short at what he saw. The twins were levitating several feet off the ground, their bodies translucent, revealing the shadowy essence within. Between them stood a third figure, barely visible but unmistakable. Daniel, or something wearing Daniel's face. "Brother," the figure whispered, its voice carrying despite the storm. "We're almost ready. The separation is almost healed." Robert reached out, but the figure dissipated like smoke. The twins collapsed, unconscious but unharmed. When they woke hours later, they had no memory of the incident, but their powers had grown even stronger. That night, every mirror in the mansion shattered simultaneously. In the fragments, Robert caught glimpses of another world, a dark place where his brother had been trapped for decades, where the curse had grown and fed on the pain of separated twins. The twins appeared in his doorway, their forms flickering between solid and shadow. "It's time to choose," they said in unison. "Save your brother, or save your world. The shadow can't have both." Behind them, darkness gathered into a familiar shape, the figure from Leo's drawings, from the old photographs, from Robert's nightmares. It was no longer content to watch from the background. It was ready to step through, using the twins as its door, using Daniel as its key. And Robert finally understood. The twins weren't just messengers or manifestations. They were a bridge, created by the curse, to connect the world of light with the world of shadows. Every display of power, every prediction, every supernatural occurrence had been drawing that bridge closer to completion. The question was no longer whether he could save his brother. The question was whether saving Daniel would unleash something far worse into the world. In their room, the twins began to sing the old lullaby again, their voices echoing impossibly. Their shadows stretched across the walls, merging with the darkness that now filled every corner of the mansion. The time for understanding was over. The time for choices had come. The old man arrived unannounced at midnight. Marcus Chen, Robert's father's oldest friend and confidant, stood on the doorstep looking older than his 70 years. His eyes widened at the sight of the twins peering from behind Robert's legs. "So it's true," Marcus whispered. "The curse has found a way to manifest." Julia had called him after discovering his name repeatedly in her research. Always present at crucial moments in the Chen family history, always watching, always recording. The twins spoke in unison. "The keeper has come." They turned and walked to the study without another word, expecting the adults to follow. Inside, Marcus sank into Robert's leather chair, his weathered hands trembling as he opened an ancient leather journal. "Your father made me swear to keep the family's secrets. But now," he glanced at the twins, who stood perfectly still, their shadows stretching impossibly long in the lamplight. "Now the curse has evolved beyond anything we prepared for." "Tell me about Daniel," Robert demanded. "Tell me what really happened." "Your parents thought they'd found a loophole," Marcus began. "Every generation, the curse demands that Chen twins be separated, one to prosper, one to suffer. Your father believed that if the separation was done in secret, with one twin believing the other dead, the curse's power would be weakened. But it didn't work," Julia interjected, reviewing her notes. "The curse grew stronger. Because intention matters," Marcus nodded. "The curse feeds on conscious choice, on the willing sacrifice of blood ties. By trying to trick it, your parents made it angry. And now," he gestured to the twins, "now it's created its own vessels." Thunder cracked outside, though the sky was clear. The twins began to hum that eerie Chinese lullaby, and the room's temperature plummeted. "There is a way to break it," Marcus continued urgently. "Your grandmother discovered it before she died. She left a letter. I found it," Julia interrupted, pulling out a yellowed envelope, "but the text is encoded." The twins moved in perfect synchronization, approaching the desk. Their hands touched the letter simultaneously, and ancient Chinese characters began glowing on the paper. "The curse can be broken," they translated in their unsettling unified voice. "But the price is balance restored. What was separated must be reunited. What was sacrificed must be reclaimed. Blood must answer blood." "Daniel," Robert whispered. "We have to find Daniel." "It's not that simple," Marcus warned. "Your brother, he's not in our world anymore. The curse took him to a place between realms. That's what these children are, bridges between his world and ours. But bringing him back," Marcus's voice cracked. "The power required would tear reality apart." The lights flickered violently. Outside, car alarms began blaring in sequence, moving away from the house like a wave. The twins' forms flickered, momentarily transparent, revealing the shadowy entities within them. "Choose quickly," they said, their voices overlapping with other, older voices. "The shadow grows hungry. It has waited long enough." Julia spread her research across the desk. Centuries of Chen family history, each generation marked by the same pattern of separation and success built on suffering. The curse doesn't just want twins separated, she realized. It wants them to choose the separation. It feeds on the guilt, the responsibility. "That's why it created us," the twins said. "To force the choice again, to make it final." Robert's pendant began to vibrate, pulling toward the twins' matching necklaces. In the corner of the room, shadows gathered into a familiar shape, Daniel's shape, but twisted, hollow. "If you want to save your brother," Marcus said gravely, "you'll have to offer something of equal value. The curse demands balance." "What could equal the life of a twin?" Julia asked. The shadows in the corner writhed, and Daniel's voice echoed through the room. "Everything. The empire built on our separation. The fortune gained from our pain. The life lived while I suffered." Robert stood, understanding filling him with dread. "The curse didn't just separate us. It used our separation to build everything I have. Every success, every building, every dollar. Blood built on blood," the twins chanted. "Choice built on choice." Marcus pulled out one final document, a ritual written in his grandmother's hand. "There's a way to enter the shadow realm, to reach Daniel." But Robert, he hesitated. "If you go there, if you choose to break the curse, I'll lose everything," Robert finished. "The company, the wealth, all of it." "No," Marcus corrected grimly. "You might lose more than that. The shadow realm, it needs an anchor. If you bring Daniel back, someone else has to take his place." The twins finished, their smiles identical and terrible. The choice crystallized in Robert's mind: save his brother and sacrifice himself, or live with the knowledge that his success was built on Daniel's eternal suffering. Behind him, the shadow of his brother reached out with hands made of darkness. Julia grabbed his arm. There has to be another way. But Robert knew there wasn't. The curse had always been about choice. Brutal, impossible choices that tore families apart. Now it was offering one final choice, perhaps the cruelest of all. The twins began to fade, their forms becoming transparent. "Choose," they commanded, their voices now entirely inhuman. "The gateway opens soon. The shadow hungers. Choose." Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, Robert Chen stood at the crossroads of destiny, facing a choice generations in the making. In his pocket, the pendant pulsed like a second heartbeat, counting down the moments until everything would change. The time for understanding was past. The time for action had come. And somewhere in the shadows, Daniel waited to see if his brother would finally make the right choice, no matter the cost. The Chen family's ancestral home in San Francisco's Chinatown stood like a forgotten sentinel among modern buildings. Built in 1882, the narrow Victorian had survived earthquakes, fires, and generations of family secrets. As Robert and Julia approached, the twins materialized beside them, though their physical forms remained back at the mansion with Marcus. "This is where it began," the twins said, their voices carrying an echo of older times, where the first choice was made. The front door key was unnecessary. It swung open at their approach, decades of dust stirring in the stale air. Julia clutched her research notes, while Robert held tight to the pendant that now pulsed constantly, like a compass pointing toward something hidden. The house was a museum of Chen family history. Faded photographs lined the walls, showing generations of twins. In each image, one sibling's face was scratched out or burned away. But it was the shadows in these photos that drew Robert's attention. They all pointed toward a central point, like spokes on a wheel. "The ritual room," the twins announced, leading them to a sealed door in the basement. The wood was covered in Chinese characters that seemed to move in the dim light. Julia consulted her notes. "According to your grandmother's letters, this is where your great-grandfather performed the original ritual. Where he first," she hesitated. "Where he sacrificed his twin," Robert finished. "Where the curse began." The door opened at his touch, revealing a circular chamber. Mirrors covered every surface, though most were cracked or clouded with age. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what Robert refused to believe was blood. As they entered, all the mirrors suddenly cleared, showing not reflections but windows into other places, or perhaps other times. In each, Robert saw Daniel at different ages. As a child in an orphanage, as a teenager in a foster home, as a young man searching for answers. But the latest images showed something else. Daniel in a realm of shadows, his form becoming less human with each passing year. The curse didn't just separate us, Robert realized. It's been transforming him. The twins approach the altar, their forms flickering between solor and shadow. Time moves differently in the shadow realm, they explained. Daniel has lived 1,000 years of darkness, while you lived 40 years of light. Julia moved around the room, photographing documents and artifacts with trembling hands. The curse operates on symbolic logic, she said. Every success in the Chen family business came after a twin was sacrificed. The properties you built, they're all connected to places where separated twins suffered. Robert's pendant pulled him toward the altar. When he touched its surface, visions flooded his mind. His great-grandfather, ambitious and desperate, making a deal with ancient forces. Generations of Chen twins torn apart, one prospering while the other vanished. His own parents, crying as they gave baby Daniel away, believing they could outsmart the curse. And Daniel himself, growing up alone, feeling the constant pull of something missing, slowly being consumed by shadows. Your father thought distance would weaken the curse, the twins said, but separation only made it stronger. Each mile between twins, each year of silence, each moment of forgotten connection, all of it fed the shadow. A hidden compartment in the altar yielded more journals. Decades of observations by Chen family members who had discovered the truth but been unable to break the curse. Each had tried to find a loophole, and each had failed. There's a pattern, Julia said, spreading the documents on the floor. Every attempt to break the curse failed because they tried to cheat it. They looked for ways around the sacrifice, instead of facing it directly. The twins spoke again, their voices now overlapping with Daniel's. The shadow requires balance. What was taken must be returned. What was broken must be mended. Robert studied the mirrors, watching Daniel's transformation in reverse. He's been trying to reach me, he realized. All these years, the accidents at my properties, the strange feelings, the dreams. He was calling out. The curse isn't just about separation, Julia added, understanding dawning in her eyes. It's about choice. Every generation had to actively choose to maintain the separation. Your parents chose to give Daniel away. You chose to believe he was dead without questioning it. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically. In every mirror, shadows began to move, converging toward their reflection. The twins' forms became increasingly transparent, revealing the ancient entities using them as vessels. The gateway opens soon, they announced. At the moment when light and shadow are perfectly balanced, you must be ready to choose. Robert touched the altar again, and this time he saw the truth that had been hidden from him his entire life. Daniel hadn't just been given away, he'd been offered as a sacrifice to ancient powers that demanded payment for success. Every Chen family fortune was built on this bargain, every achievement stained with the blood of separated twins. I can save him, Robert said, certainty filling him, but not by trying to cheat the curse like our parents did. The price will be everything, the twins warned. All you've built, all you've achieved, perhaps even your place in this world. Julia grabbed his arm. There's something else in these journals. Something about the twins born after failed attempts to break the curse. They're not just children, they're manifestations of the curse itself. If you break it, we will cease to be. The twins finished, their smiles identical and eerily calm. We are not meant to exist. We are only the bridge between worlds. As if to demonstrate, their forms flickered again, momentarily revealing the ancient shadow entities wearing the shape of children. The room's mirrors vibrated with power, showing glimpses of the shadow realm where Daniel waited. Robert's pendant pulsed faster, stronger. The time was approaching when the barrier between worlds would be thinnest, when a choice could be made that would ripple back through generations of Chen family history. We should go, Julia said softly. We have what we need. But as they turned to leave, Robert caught one final glimpse in the mirrors, not of the past, but of possible futures. In one, he saw himself wealthy and successful, but forever haunted by his brother's sacrifice. In another, he saw something else, something that made his heart stop. The twins spoke one last time as they left the ancestral home. "Choose wisely, Robert Chen. The shadow has waited centuries for this moment. It will not wait much longer." Behind them, the house seemed to shrink in on itself, as if pulling away from the modern world around it. The curse had shown them its origins. Now it waited to see what they would do with that knowledge. The journey to the past had revealed the way forward, but the price of that path was higher than Robert had ever imagined. They prepared the mansion's grand ballroom at sunset. Marcus drew ancient symbols on the marble floor using chalk mixed with his own blood, while Julia arranged artifacts from the Chen family home in a precise pattern: photographs, pendant necklaces, twin baby clothes, all connected to generations of separated siblings. The twins stood at the center of the elaborate design, their forms increasingly unstable. Sometimes they appeared as normal children, sometimes as shadows wearing children's shapes, and sometimes they flickered out of existence entirely, leaving only empty air and an echo of that haunting Chinese lullaby. "The gateway opens at midnight," Marcus explained, consulting his grandmother's journals, "when the barrier between worlds is thinnest." But Robert, he hesitated. "Once it begins, it cannot be stopped. The price must be paid in full." Robert nodded, touching the pendant that now burned hot against his chest. Around them, the mansion's electronics went haywire, lights flickering, phones ringing with no one on the line, security cameras showing impossible images of the same room from different times. "The shadows are gathering," the twins announced in unison, their voices overlapping with others. Daniel's voice, the voices of past Chen twins, ancient voices speaking forgotten dialects. Julia completed the final circle of salt and iron filings. "According to your grandmother's notes, the ritual has 3 phases," she said, her academic tone betraying her nervousness. "First, we open the gateway, then we locate Daniel in the shadow realm. Finally," she looked at Robert, "the exchange." The twins began to move in perfect synchronization, walking the circumference of the ritual circle. Where their feet touched, the chalk lines began to glow with a pale blue light. The same light emanated from all 3 pendants, Robert's and the twins, pulsing in rhythm like heartbeats. "It's starting," Marcus warned. "Everyone in position." Robert took his place in the inner circle, while Julia and Marcus stood at opposite points of a triangle outside it. The twins stopped their walking and faced each other across the circle, their forms now almost completely transparent. At exactly midnight, every light in the mansion went out simultaneously. In the darkness, the glowing chalk lines grew brighter, and the twins began to sing, not the lullaby this time, but something older, a chant that made the air itself vibrate with power. The pendants pulsing grew stronger, faster. Robert felt his own heartbeat synchronizing with their rhythm. In the mirrors Julia had arranged around the room, shadows began to move independently of any light source, gathering and thickening like storm clouds. "Brother," came Daniel's voice, seeming to emanate from every shadow at once. "I've waited so long." The temperature in the room plumbed. Frost formed on the windows, creating patterns that looked like reaching hands. The twins' forms flickered more violently now, sometimes splitting into multiple images, sometimes merging into a single shadow that wore both their faces. "The gateway opens," they announced, their voices now entirely inhuman. The shadow hungers for balance. In the center of the circle, the air began to tear. There was no other word for it. Reality itself split open, revealing glimpses of another place, a realm of perpetual twilight, where shadows moved with purpose and malice. Marcus began reading from his grandmother's journal, ancient Chinese words that made the tear wider. Through it, Robert caught glimpses of movement, a figure that might have been Daniel, but twisted by decades in the shadow realm. "Robert," Julia called out urgently, The journals warned about this moment. The shadow realm. It's not just where Daniel is trapped. It's alive, conscious. It wants to break through completely. The twins turned to Robert, moving in perfect mirror images. "Choose now," they commanded. "Save your brother or save your world. The shadow must be fed." The tear in reality grew larger, and Robert felt himself being pulled toward it. The pendant burned hotter, almost unbearable against his skin. Through the gateway, he saw Daniel more clearly now. His twin, aged to match him exactly, but changed by his time in the shadow realm. His eyes were hollow pools of darkness, and his form seemed to shift between human and shadow. "Little brother," Daniel's voice echoed, "set me free." But something was wrong. The shadows weren't just gathering, they were taking shape, forming into something vast and ancient that wore Daniel's face like a mask. The twins began to dissolve, their forms breaking apart into wisps of shadow that were drawn toward the gateway. "It's a trap," Julia realized, consulting her notes frantically. "The curse. It's not just about separating twins. It's been using their pain, their broken bonds, to build something, to become something." The entity in the gateway smiled with Daniel's face, but too many teeth. "Clever girl," it said in a voice that was Daniel's, but also much older. "Did you think I would wait centuries just to torment one family? The Chen twins were my door. Every separation, every choice to maintain that separation, every moment of guilt and pain, all of it fed me, shaped me." Robert staggered as understanding hit him. "You're not just holding Daniel prisoner," he said. "You're wearing him like a suit, using him to reach our world." The twins spoke one final time before their forms dispersed completely. "We were never real children. We were bait. Fragments of Daniel's humanity given form to draw you here, to make you choose." The ritual circle blazed brighter, and the gateway grew large enough for something to step through. The shadow wearing Daniel's face reached out with hands made of darkness. "Choose, brother," it said in Daniel's voice. "Save me and doom your world, or leave me here and live with the knowledge of what your success has truly cost." The price of the ritual suddenly became clear. It wasn't just about sacrificing wealth or success. It was about choosing between his brother and the world itself. The entity had used generations of Chen twins to weaken the barrier between worlds, and now it needed one final choice, freely made, to break through completely. Marcus began chanting faster, trying to contain the gateway, but blood began running from his nose with the effort. Julia's research papers flew round the room, their pages burning with blue fire. Robert stood at the center of it all, the pendant burning against his chest, facing a choice that was both personal and cosmic in scale. In the gateway, the thing wearing his brother's face waited, patient as only something centuries old can be. The ritual had begun, but its true purpose was far darker than anyone had imagined. The gateway pulsed like a living thing, its edges writhing with shadows that seemed to reach for the real world. In its depths, the entity wearing Daniel's face grew larger, more substantial, while around it, reality itself began to crack and splinter. "You've built your empire on separation," it said, using Daniel's voice, but overlaid with something ancient and hungry. "Every success, every achievement, all of it powered by broken bonds. Did you never wonder why the Chen family prospered only after twins were torn apart?" Robert stood his ground in the ritual circle, though every instinct screamed at him to run. The pendant around his neck burned white-hot, matching the intensity of the glowing chalk lines on the floor. Behind him, Marcus continued his chanting, blood now streaming from his eyes with the effort of containing the gateway. "Your brother was the perfect vessel," the entity continued. "Decades of isolation, of feeling incomplete, of knowing he was sacrificed for another's success. Such exquisite pain, such perfect corruption." Julia frantically flipped through her notes, papers flying in the supernatural wind that filled the ballroom. Robert, the twins. They weren't just manifestations. They were fragments of Daniel's humanity, the parts of him that remained uncorrupted. That's why they led us here, why they helped us understand. As if in response, the dissolved forms of Mia and Leo briefly reconstituted, their small faces appearing in the shadows around the gateway. Remember, they whispered in unison. The curse requires choice. It has always been about choice. The entity laughed with too many voices at once. Yes, choose. Save your brother and doom your world, or abandon him again and live with that guilt forever. Either way, I feed. Either way, I grow stronger. But Robert's mind was racing, putting pieces together. Every generation of Chen twins, separated by choice. Every fortune built on willing sacrifice. Every attempt to break the curse failing because they tried to cheat instead of facing the true choice. Daniel, he called out, not to the entity but to whatever remained of his brother within it. I understand now. I'm sorry. Not just for what our parents did, but for never questioning it. For building my life on the foundation of your suffering. The entity's form wavered slightly. Daniel's real face briefly visible beneath the shadow mask. Little brother, he whispered, his true voice breaking through. Help me. The pendants, Julia shouted over the howling wind. They're connected to the original sacrifice. The first twins, the first choice. Robert grasped his pendant, feeling its heat pulse in time with his heartbeat. In the shadows, the dissolved forms of the twins solidified one last time, their own pendants glowing in harmony. No, the entity roared, its form expanding to fill the gateway. You are mine, Daniel Chen. Your pain, your isolation, your darkness, all mine. But Robert understood at last. Every generation had tried to break the curse by avoiding the choice, by finding clever ways around it. But the only way forward was through. The only way to break the cycle was to make a different choice entirely. I choose both, he declared, stepping toward the gateway. Not success or family, not prosperity or brotherhood. Both, all of it. The curse feeds on separation, on the choice to value one thing over another. So I choose connection instead. The entity writhed, its shadow form destabilizing. Impossible. The power comes from separation. It has always been thus. No, Robert said, raising his pendant. The power comes from choice. And I choose to end the separation, to bear the cost of connection. He pressed his pendant against the gateway's surface. Across the circle, the twins' dissolved forms did the same, their pendants flowing with binding energy. The 3 points of light formed a triangle, and in its center, Daniel's true face emerged from the shadow entity, struggling against its hold. The ritual isn't about exchanging places, Julia realized, her voice filled with awe. It's about choosing to share the burden instead of shifting it. The entity screamed in rage and fear as Robert reached through the gateway, past the shadow substance, toward his brother's outstretched hand. The moment their fingers touched, an explosion of light filled the ballroom. The shadow entity tried to maintain its grip on Daniel, but the combined power of the 3 pendants, representing past, present, and the possibility of a different future, proved stronger. Brother, Daniel gasped, his real voice breaking free. Help me choose connection over isolation. Robert pulled with all his strength, physical and spiritual, while the entity thrashed and howled. The twins' dissolved forms swirled around them, their essence rejoining Daniel's humanity, making him whole enough to fight back against the shadows that had consumed him. The mansion shook from its foundations. The ritual circle blazed so bright it burned itself permanently into the ballroom floor. Marcus collapsed, his containment chant finally failing, while Julia shielded her eyes from the supernatural display. In that moment of crisis, as reality itself seemed to bend and buckle, Robert made his final choice. Not just to save his brother, but to accept the full cost of undoing generations of willing sacrifice. Every property built on separated twins began to crumble across the city. Every fortune built on broken bonds began to dissolve. The entity howled in fury and desperation. If I cannot have him, I will take you all. But its power, built on separation and sacrifice, couldn't stand against the force of willing reunion. As Robert pulled his brother free of the gateway, decades of shadow essence burning away, the entity began to collapse in on itself, its carefully gathered power scattering like smoke in a strong wind. The gateway started to close, reality sealing itself shut. The shadow entity made one last grab for the brothers, but the combined light of the three pendants formed a barrier it couldn't cross. Choose. The twins' voices echoed one final time before their essence fully rejoined Daniel. Choose differently. Choose better. And in that moment of truth, as the gateway sealed and the entity screamed its way back to whatever darkness had spawned it, Robert Chen finally understood the true meaning of choice, of sacrifice, of family. The confrontation was ending, but its consequences were only beginning. As the supernatural light faded from the ballroom, Robert held his brother's solid, real form, no longer a shadow, no longer corrupted. Daniel Chen, aged to match his twin exactly, breathed real air for the first time in decades. The pendant around his neck, once burning hot with power, now lay cool against his skin. But something was different. Wrong, right. The children, Julia gasped, looking around the now empty ballroom. Mia and Leo. They're gone. Not gone, Daniel said, his voice hoarse from disuse. Returned. They were never real children. They were pieces of me, fragments of my humanity preserved in the space between worlds. The curse used them to draw us here, but in doing so, it made its own undoing possible. Robert helped his brother to his feet, both of them unsteady. Through the mansion's windows, they could see Los Angeles transforming. Every building the Chen family had erected through cursed prosperity was dissolving, returning to what had been there before. The empire built on separation was undoing itself. Marcus, weak but conscious, checked his phone. The Chen Group stock. It's gone, not crashed, not bankrupted, simply ceased to exist. As if the company never was. Because in this new reality, it never was, Julia realized, consulting her notes, which were rapidly becoming blank pages. The curse wasn't just supernatural, it was temporal. By choosing connection over separation, you've undone everything built on the original choice. Robert looked at his brother, understanding, dawning. That's the true price. Not just losing everything, but never having had it in the first place. A complete rewrite of our family's history. Daniel nodded. The entity didn't just feed on separation. It fed on the particular pain of knowing you chose that separation. By choosing differently, you've created a paradox that's resolving itself through reality. Around them, the mansion began to fade, its luxury dissolving like mist in morning sun. Through the dissolving walls, they could see the neighborhood changing, returning to what it would have been if the Chen family had never built their fortune on cursed choices. But if everything built on the curse is undoing itself, Julia said slowly, then our memories of it should be fading too. The fact that we remember, that means we're the anchors, Daniel finished. The four of us in this room, we have to remember both timelines to ensure the choice is never made again. Robert's phone buzzed with a news alert. According to the article, Chen real estate development had never existed. Instead, historical records showed a modest but successful family business, Chen Brothers Construction, founded by twins Robert and Daniel Chen, known for their ethical practices and community involvement. Look, Marcus said, holding up his grandmother's journal. The pages were rewriting themselves. The curse still existed in the records, but now as a warning rather than a tragedy. The Chen family's history was transforming from a story of success built on sacrifice to one of temptation resisted. More changes rippled through reality. Julia's research papers shifted, documenting not the curse's effects, but the family's resistance to its lure. The photographs on the walls showed unbroken pairs of twins through generations, their shadows normal and unthreatening. The twins, Robert said suddenly, Mia and Leo, they knew. They weren't just fragments of Daniel's humanity. They were showing us what could have been, what should have been. Two people working together, instead of one prospering through another's sacrifice. Daniel touched his pendant, now a simple family heirloom rather than a cursed artifact. They were the possibility of connection given form. The curse tried to use them as bait, but instead, they became the key to its undoing. The mansion had fully transformed now into a comfortable family home, smaller, warmer, filled with photos of the brothers growing up together. Their shared life, the one that should have been. But the entity had left one final twist. As reality settled into its new configuration, Robert and Daniel realized they could remember both timelines, the cursed path of separation and wealth, and this new reality of modest success and unbroken bonds. The burden of that knowledge, that dual memory, was their true inheritance. That's why we had to be the ones to break it, Robert understood at last. Not just to undo the curse, but to remember it, to carry the warning forward. Julia, whose own memories remained intact as a witness, began documenting everything, not as supernatural research now, but as a family history, a cautionary tale about the true meaning of prosperity and sacrifice. Marcus smiled weakly. My grandmother would be proud. She always said the curse could only be broken by someone willing to choose family over fortune. She just didn't realize it would mean choosing it retroactively. The sun rose on a changed Los Angeles. The Chen brothers' construction company had helped build the city, but through honest work and genuine connection, rather than cursed prosperity. Their success was modest compared to the empire that had been, but it was real, untainted by supernatural bargains. In the new family photo album, there was a picture of young Robert and Daniel at their company's founding. Behind them stood their proud parents, no longer burdened by an impossible choice, no longer haunted by sacrifice. And in every photo after, the brothers appeared together, their shadows normal, their smiles genuine. The curse wasn't gone. Such power never truly dies. But it was transformed, its lesson inverted. Where once it had offered prosperity through sacrifice, now it stood as a testament to the power of choosing connection over separation, of refusing the temptation to build success on broken bonds. In the end, that was the true twist. Not that the curse was broken, but that it had been transformed by the very thing it sought to destroy. The unbreakable bond between twins who chose each other, even if it meant rewriting history itself. The Chen family's story had changed from a tragedy of separation to a testimony of connection. And somewhere in the shadows, two children, who were never really children, smiled. Their purpose fulfilled, their essence returned to where it belonged. The curse of choice had become a blessing of choosing right.